happy to see your smiling faces in the house of God today. It makes me very thankful. I was thinking this week about how thankful I am. One of the things that makes me most thankful in the whole world is when my wife cooks for me. Every family's different. I do not consider this like my right to walk in the door to the smell of something delicious every day. That's not my right. It's not her obligation to cook for me. But she does because she's awesome. And I'm very thankful. We have an arrangement, right? We split up stuff in the house. I just don't like to cook, and I'm so thankful that she doesn't. If I did like to cook, this is something Sam complains about. If I did, I know it would be my favorite part. It would be timing everything to be done at the same time. I watch her do that. I hear her complain about how hard that is. Like in an ideal world, the chicken, the potatoes, and the green beans are all ding, ding, all your timers go off at one time, right? That's the best case scenario. Very difficult. But it sounds like fun to me. It sounds kind of like a game, like a puzzle to make sure everything, because sometimes the time that you expect it to be is not quite right. Your oven didn't quite hit the temperature at the right time, all that kind of stuff. That sounds very fun. I'm not going to do it anytime soon, but it does sound like fun. Timing is so important, more than just in cooking your meals. Timing is so important. It's everything. We can all think of things in our lives that came down to timing. Great blessings that came down to timing. God's timing. Great misfortunes, bad things that happened. It was because of timing, being in the right place at the right time, the wrong place at the wrong time, meeting the right person at the right time, or again, the wrong person at the right time. They say, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You hear that? Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. That's timing, baby. It's all about timing. Does anyone remember what kicked off World War I? I know, that's asking a lot, right? Go back to your 9th grade history class. I don't remember much of my 9th grade history class. For some reason, this thing stuck out. It's probably because it's funny. It's a funny name. It was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That name may sound familiar, maybe because it's a rock band, also because his assassination kicked off World War I. Let me tell you about it. The city is Sarajevo, the capital of the nation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. See, some of these words are going to be like, oh, I heard that word several decades ago. This nation, Bosnia-Herzegovina, had just been annexed by Austria-Hungary. So this Austria-Hungary superpower is growing. It's gaining a lot of power in the nation, in the world. And many of the people in this nation liked that. They liked us being annexed by this powerful country. Other people, not so much. Especially neighboring countries that were concerned about how big Austria-Hungary was getting, how powerful. And so a group of 6 young men from Serbia, this neighbor nation, they were upset about the growing superpower, so they set out to make a statement through assassination. This is a picture of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. A great mustache, powerful man. He was next in line to the Austro-Hungarian throne. He was going to be king of this really, really powerful nation. He and his wife, Sophie, the Duchess of Hohenberg, visited Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. It was just one of those political visits. We're going to ride in a car, we're going to do the Queen Wave, right? Visit some important things, make a speech, and get out of there. It was a political visit. And there was this group of assassins, 6 young men, positioned around the city armed with guns and bombs. Whatever way they were going to make this happen, they were going to make it happen and assassinate Franz Ferdinand. When the timing was right, they would make their move. Now the motorcade, 6 cars are driving through the city of Sarajevo. There's cars with policemen and the governor of the city, Archduke and his wife, they're rolling around through the city. They went past the first 2 assassins, and they chickened out. They failed to act. I don't know what their issue was, but they didn't. Since the opportunity was right, or they were just too scared, they didn't make a move. The 3rd assassin did make a move. When the motorcade came by him, Franz Ferdinand and his wife were in an open-top car like this. And so this 3rd assassin had a bomb, a timed bomb, and he threw it into the car. Unfortunately, he didn't have great aim. And it bounced off the back of the car. Can you imagine? I can't, really. But it bounced off the back of the car, hit the ground, and then the next car drove over it, and then it detonated. Injured about 20 people. Not what this guy had in mind. He was severely beaten by the crowd and then taken into custody, that third assassin. But now we have a commotion on our hands, right? So now everyone's freaking out, and they're speeding through town, headed to the safety of town hall, and they pass the last three of the assassins, and they couldn't do anything because of all the commotion. Now the governor and Franz Ferdinand, they made speeches at town hall, and it was suggested, all right, now let's just wait here until the military gets here to get us out of here, because clearly somebody is planning some violence, and we need to get out of here safely. And the governor said, in my city, he was quoted as saying, do you think that Sarajevo is full of assassins? He didn't realize that it kind of was. Like, there was a bunch of other people there that had some dastardly plans. But the governor, he just put his foot down and said, no, we're going to be all right. Let's take a route when we go to our next destination. We're going to go in the back, like around the city. So we don't go in like little alleys in the middle of the city. Let's just take a route around. So instead of waiting for military detail, instead of just getting out of the city, remember, we're here on a political visit. We want to look good. So the Archduke and the Duchess said, let's visit the hospital. These people who were injured in an assassination attempt of us, let's go visit the hospital. And again, the governor said, let's go around the heart of the city. Now let's talk about timing. The governor's usual aide, like the governor's aide who would send the messages to the drivers about what route we're going to take, was in the hospital. He was not there that day. So the governor gave it to another random person and said, hey, tell the drivers we're going to do this alternate route. The driver failed to do so. So they took off this motorcade, 3 cars now, took off to the hospital, taking the normal route. The first 2 cars turned into the middle of the city. And the governor, the Archduke, and the Duchess are in the 3rd car, and he says, whoa, whoa, whoa. The governor says, that's not where we're going. He yells to the driver. The driver throws it in reverse. The engine stalls out. Guess who's walking by that exact corner at that exact moment? Assassin number 4, Gavrilo Princip. He was repositioning himself, hoping, hey, maybe they're going to come back out. Maybe we're going to be able to, maybe I can get a shot at the Archduke and the Duchess. And this car, can you imagine? It's rumored he had just eaten a sandwich at the restaurant on this corner. Can you imagine just finishing up your sandwich? And then your target their car just stopped right in front of you. And because of this, he was within range. He was able to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand in the stalled car and the Duchess Sophia. In case you forgot why I'm telling the story, this incredible story of timing and opportunity and circumstance led to World War I, kicked off the most violent and vicious war the world had seen at this point. So much timing in this story. This team of assassins happened to be in town for this particular visit. The 3rd assassin threw the bomb, missed the car, and it changed the Archduke's plans entirely. The route instructions didn't make it to the driver, so he could throw it in reverse, happened to stall out the car, happened to have an assassin right there on the corner. Exactly the right time, exactly the right place. Timing is everything. This is a portrait of how they remember those events. It was in the newspaper. Timing is everything. As followers of Jesus, we serve a God who we believe has time in his hands, has a plan, has a purpose. He is a God of perfect timing. We don't need luck and chance because we have blessing in God's timing. We can trust him. We can trust he knows best. We can trust that everything good comes from him. Whenever good things come, they're coming at the right time because God has perfect timing. But it can be easy for us to question God's timing. It can be easy for me to question God's timing. Why haven't I been promoted? Why haven't I been given that opportunity that I'm looking for? Why haven't I been married? Or why haven't I been healed or delivered from this addiction, mental health struggle, whatever? Why haven't I seen this promise that I know God has promised? Why hasn't it come to life yet? It's easy to question God's timing. We can trust God with those questions. I think that's an important piece of this. When we're having questions about his timing and kind of tick off, like, hey, why aren't you making this happen how I want it to happen? We can make like David in the Psalms and say, God, why? Why do you make me suffer? Why do you put me through this? And that's not a perfect picture of reality. He's not making you suffer, I would say. But we can trust him. We have that biblical example of David. We can trust him. With our frustrations, we can bring them to him, ask him to help us through them. But what we shouldn't do is take matters into our own hands, to get ourselves in trouble, to override God's timing for our own good ideas, our own suggested timeline. It reminds me of Abraham. God promised Abraham, he said, I'm going to make you into a mighty nation. You're going to, Abraham's like, I'm pretty old. My wife's pretty old. And that doesn't really make sense. But God said, I promise. You're going to become a whole people group. You're going to be a mighty nation. And the whole world will be saved through that people group. And then Abraham said, I don't know when this is going to happen. It's like, I trust you. If I can put trust in air quotes. I trust you to do it. Abraham gets bored. He gets antsy. He says, all right, maybe I'm supposed to act. I'll jump in. God said through Abraham and his wife Sarah, but maybe he meant through his wife's servant. Maybe I can impregnate Hagar, and that's going to be the nation that God builds. That is going to be the promise fulfilled. And so he impregnates Hagar. Hagar has a son named Ishmael. And God said, oh, you did it, buddy. I told you what I told you, exactly how I told you, for a reason, in my timing. And then this Ishmael becomes a people itself, not the people of God's promise, in fact, a threat to the people of God's promise. God said, hey, you really messed up, and that's going to be trouble for you forever. That's what happens when we try to take things into our own hands, instead of trusting God's timing. In our partnership with God, he does not ask us to do it all. He does not ask us to figure it out. He has not asked us to do that. He asks us to trust him. And sometimes trusting him means waiting on him. Saying like, hey, I'm checking my watch again, and you're still not moving. I trust you for the promise, but could we hurry it up? He's got a plan. He has a way. He has it under control. Trusting God's timing is tough. It says in Ecclesiastes 3, for everything there is a season. A time for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to harvest. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down, and a time to build up. A time to cry and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to turn away. A time to search and a time to quit searching. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be quiet and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. This is not God's picture of a redeemed creation. But he says, as long as you guys are hanging out down here, there's a time for everything. God is concerned with timing. He cares about timing. He cares about seasons. And he has it under control. And we can trust him. This morning we are continuing our series on the book of Exodus. And in Exodus, this book has so much rich history. It's the birth of the Hebrew people. It is many iconic, important biblical moments rich in Hebrew history, which becomes Christian history. This is all our faith history. It's rich in poetic, spiritual truths that you kind of got to dig through a little bit sometimes to find. And that's what we're studying as we look at Exodus in this series. Last week we introduced the book of Exodus and the scene being set up, right? The Hebrew people walked into Egypt willingly at the end of Genesis. We're starving out here. They walk into Egypt willingly to be saved from a famine. And you turn the page into Exodus, and now they're enslaved in Egypt against their will. The Pharaoh of Egypt feels threatened by their growing numbers, and he hatches a plot to have all of the infant boys killed. All Hebrew boys will be murdered. The Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, refuse to carry out these orders. This Hebrew woman and her daughter hatch another plot that saved this woman's son's life by sending him to be adopted into Pharaoh's own house by Pharaoh's own daughter. And like the ark that preserved humanity through Noah, this basket was sent down the river to preserve God's people, to lead them out of Egypt. This is Moses. That baby boy would go on to lead the Hebrew people. God was raising a redeemer. It's what he does. It's who he is. This is his origin story. He would go on to be one of these really important biblical figures. This is all Exodus. We're going to look today at the end of Exodus 2. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there now. We're going to hit pretty much everything, every verse in the end of Exodus 2. So 11 to 25, we're going to be looking at this morning. And it is going to bring us deeper into Moses' life. set us up for the call of God. I see 3 sections in this text this morning. We see Moses kill an Egyptian, Moses flee to Midian, and then a setup in prepare us for Exodus 3, which will be the burning bush if you're one peek ahead. Through this text, we see a very specific theme start to play out. God has this plan for Moses. He's going to be the leader of the Hebrew people. He's going to lead them out of Egypt. He's going to do miracles. It's going to be amazing. He's going to do it in his own time. Because before Moses even knows the plan, he's trying to bring the plan into action on his own time. The theme that I see highlighted here is God's perfect timing. As we get into the end of Exodus 2, remember, Moses at this point, he was nursed by his biological mother. He's raised Hebrew and then brought into the Egyptian palace, raised as an Egyptian. He's got a lot going on. He's practically royalty at this point, some kind of leadership in the nation, likely because of his education and background. And we will start with this first section where Moses kills an Egyptian. Exodus 2, 11 and 12. Many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews. He saw how hard they were forced to work. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. Moses is about 40 years old at this point. He is having an identity crisis, if I can be really honest. He's like, he knows he's Hebrew. He grew up in the Egyptian palace. So he's like 1 foot in one world and 1 foot in the other. He knows his people are being brutally oppressed, slaves in Egypt, and he is benefiting from that slavery as one of the Egyptian elite. He's benefiting from the slavery of his own people, and that's freaking him out. Identity crisis. He's going through some stuff. So he goes to visit his Hebrew people. He sees how they're being treated. It's brutal. It disgusts and disturbs him. So he intervenes. An Egyptian taskmaster is beating this Hebrew slave, and Moses cannot stand it. He jumps in and murders this Egyptian. He realizes that's a problem. I just killed the guy. So he looks around, he buries the body, pretends like nothing happened. And this Egyptian was well within his rights, delegated authority to be a slave master over the Hebrews. So he was beating a slave, he was allowed to do that by order of the Pharaoh. In fact, if he had even killed that slave, there probably would have been no punishment, very light, if any. What Moses did, legally speaking, very out of line. You can see the heart of righteousness in what he did, right? I want to stop this brutality. But it wasn't good legally. He had some issues. Killing an Egyptian who was just doing his job. He was interfering with the Pharaoh's will. He's about to have issues. He's a murderer now. Can't really take that back. He did that. Exodus 2, 13 and 14. The next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw 2 Hebrew men fighting. "Why are you beating up your friend?" Moses said to the one who had started the fight. The man replied, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" Then Moses was afraid, thinking everyone knows what I did. Moses was trying to solve a problem, and he created a serious problem for himself. I read an article this week about the Cobra effect. When you try to solve a problem and you accidentally create a much larger problem, it's called the Cobra effect. And it gets its name from when the British colonized India. They came into this place, they got all these snakes everywhere. And they're like, well, we're British, we like tea, not snakes. So they were like, we got to get rid of the snakes. So they set up this program and they said, hey, if you kill a snake and bring it to this government facility, we'll pay you. They put a bounty on these snakes. And some of you are like, yeah, well, that plan is great. I would love to see some snakes die. And it worked really well. Like, no snakes for a while. And then the locals started to breed snakes. And then kill them in adulthood and bring them and get paid for it. And when the government caught wind of this, they were like, okay, cut this off. They cut it off completely. And then the remaining snakes were abandoned into the wild. And now there's more snakes than when they even started. They call it the Cobra effect. When you try to solve a problem and you accidentally make it way worse. We could look at Abraham for his great example of the Cobra effect when he knew God had promised a nation of people. He tried to solve that by impregnating Hagar and become a much bigger problem for his people in the future. You could probably think of some examples where you tried to solve a problem and you actually made it much more worse. You thought you could do something better, more efficiently, and you made it much more complicated and more painful. Moses and Abraham give us a great warning. Even when you know the promises of God, you trust the promises of God, you cannot try to solve a problem without him. You can't try to bring his promises into fruition, to fulfillment, without him. Don't trust in your own problem-solving skills. I've been there. You've done that. Moses and that did it right here in Exodus. We may not understand God's timing, but it is always the best. It's always perfect. And we get into trouble when we take things in our own hands. Moses' instincts were right. The way the Hebrews were being treated was brutal and disgusting and disturbing. It was wrong. God was going to fix it. God was going to fix it in his timing. I don't know if Moses wasn't ready to be the leader, or if the Hebrew people, it sounds like they had an attitude too, right? Maybe the Hebrew people weren't ready to be led. This attitude in here foreshadows what Moses is going to experience later with his people criticizing constantly, like, can't stand your leadership. It reads to me like God was not asked. Moses didn't say, God, how would you like me to solve this problem? He just acted. He just took matters into his own hands. It caused a huge problem. And I mentioned it was out of line legally. And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened, and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. What a day for Moses. What a 2 days. Overnight. He has been royalty for 40 years. And overnight, he goes from Egyptian royalty to being a wanted man, a murderer, wanted by the state. And let me pause here to say it is true that Moses was a murderer at this point. And I don't like to get too far ahead. I keep hinting to what's going to happen later in Exodus. But I do want to keep in mind what God can do through this very imperfect man. Through a man who cannot seem to keep his reactions, his anger under control. And that gets him in trouble later too. He becomes one of the most important Hebrew leaders of all time, of our faith history. And he is a murderer. God does not require you to be perfect to be used. Moses' indiscretions did not keep him from being used. In fact, it makes God look better because of Moses' issues. So he's been brought up in Egypt. He's become a wanted man overnight. And he has to leave. He has to leave his Hebrew people. He has to leave his home in Egypt. And that brings us to the second section where Moses flees to Midian. Midian is this desert region near Egypt. We don't know a whole lot about it, but this is what Exodus says, 15 to 17. When Moses arrived in Midian, he sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters who came as usual to draw water and fill the water troughs for their father's flocks. But some other shepherds came and chased them away. So Moses jumped up and rescued the girls from their shepherds, and he drew water for their flocks. Despite the fact that Moses reacted earlier and killed a man, he still has a general idea of what good and evil are. He knows right from wrong. He knows he needs to step in to help a few vulnerable women at this well. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked, "Why are you back so soon today?" "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds," they answered. "And then he drew water for us and watered our flocks." "Then where is he?" the father asked. "Why did you leave him there? Invite him to come and eat with us." What a beautiful response. Let's have a meal with this guy. We don't know much about this family. We know that they're hospitable and appreciative of Moses. We learned that Reuel is the priest of Midian. He's also later referred to as Jethro. You'll see him called Jethro later. Most likely 2 names for the same guy. One might be a title, stuff like that. Same guy. We don't know if this family are God-fearers, if they serve Yahweh. Because we're out of like Jacob's direct family. But there is a history of Yahweh worship in other regions, including Midian. Reuel's name ends in El, which is like shorthand for God. And we might get this name to show us this is a God-fearing family. Actually, later, he will directly worship Yahweh. And so there's some hints here. We might be able to ascertain that these are God-fearing people. Exodus 2, 21 to 22. Moses accepted the invitation, and he settled there with him. He says, "I'm moving in." In time, Reuel gave Moses his daughter Zipporah to be his wife. Later, she gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom. For he explained, "I have been a foreigner in a foreign land." This is Moses' identity crisis again. I didn't emphasize it in the last verse, but when Reuel's daughters came up to Moses. They said, "That's an Egyptian." They instantly recognized him as an Egyptian. Whether it was his clothes or his jewelry, something about him said Egyptian. Moses is like, he knows he's a Hebrew. He knows who his people are. And then he was made into an Egyptian to some degree for his own safety. And now, he is not welcome with either. He had one foot in both worlds, and they kicked him out totally from both. And now, he's not welcome. He tried to jump the gun, avenge the Hebrew people against the Egyptians. The Hebrews turned their back on him. The Egyptians want him for murder. He's a Midian now. A stranger in a strange land. As a representation for God's people, the Hebrews are in a strange land. Seemingly forgotten the promise of God. Seemingly forgotten Abraham's covenant. And this is the third section, the setup for where we're headed in Exodus 3. 23 and 24. Years passed, and the king of Egypt died. But the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. They cried out for help. And their cry rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If it feels like I'm bringing up Abraham a lot, so does the text. We're supposed to keep in mind there's a promise coming. The covenant will be fulfilled. Moses was out of line when he intervened, but he was right about the end game. He was right about what was coming. He was outside of God's timing, but he had an idea what God's plan was going to be. He was going to liberate his people. God was going to release his people from slavery in Egypt. Because God's people aren't defined by famine that brought them into Egypt. They're not defined by the slavery that they suffered in Egypt. They're defined by the covenant. God's people, the Hebrew people, were defined by God's promise to Abraham, promise to their father's father. Father Abraham had many sons. I'm one of them, so are you. And this is the original. Hebrew people clung to the promise. God remembered. God blessed them. He would never forget that. He said, God said, I'm going to make these people a mighty nation, save the whole world through them. Whoever blesses them will be blessed. Whoever curses them will be cursed. This next verse. He looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. Remember, God doesn't change his mind the way we understand changing our mind. That last verse said that he remembered the covenant. It doesn't mean that he forgot the covenant. When Scripture says that God remembered something, we see it in Genesis and Exodus, some of the Psalms, a bunch of places. It means he is about to intervene. He's about to act on behalf of his people. Bible scholars would call this condescending language, because God is higher, and so to reveal himself, he uses language we would understand. It doesn't perfectly describe what he's doing. He doesn't forget and remember things. He doesn't change his mind. But he's revealed himself that way so we can begin to understand what he's doing. When God remembers something, it's not the same as when I remember something. But it helps us. It's how he's chosen to reveal himself to us. God is good. That's the starting place, right? God is good. I can trust him. And God's timing is always perfect. It's always the best time. He hears his people. They're suffering as slaves, crying out to him as slaves in Egypt. God has a covenant with his people. He said, I'm going to be there for my people. In his timing. When I see God responding to his people with compassion, it makes me think of Jesus' ministry. He saw pain in people. He recognized people that had been discarded by society. Nobody had a time of day for these people. Jesus saw them, he cared about them, and his heart was moved with compassion. The people had been abandoned. God's people were under Roman occupation in their own place, in their own land. He saw priests and scribes that should be the spiritual leaders, and instead they were working on how to exclude people from God's kingdom. Matthew recorded it this way. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. That's the character of our God. He had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus was moved Spirit comes, he says, the Comforter is coming. The Comforter. Compassion, this huge part of Jesus' ministry, the huge part of the role of the Holy Spirit, the huge part of what Yahweh does in Exodus. He's moved by compassion for his suffering people. The ultimate way God saved us from suffering. You know what I'm going to say. This is death and resurrection. While we were yet sinners, we weren't even asking for salvation. We were so blinded by unrighteousness, we did not know we needed salvation. And he said, I'm still going in there. He stepped into creation because it's who he is, it's what he does. He hears the cries of his people. He's moved by compassion. And his timing is perfect. There's so much history and spiritual truth in Exodus that is good for me, good for us today. His perfect timing means we can trust him, we can rely on him. More and more every day, I can trust him and rely on him. Church, are you trusting him? Really, really, are you relying on him? He hasn't asked us to just figure it out. He asked us to trust him, to rely on him. He didn't ask me to be an overcomer by myself. He asked me to trust him. He didn't ask me to be the waymaker. He asked me to trust him. Every day, I want to trust him. I want to put more and more of my life into his hands. I was just talking with a former student of ours on Friday night about when we first started in ministry, and I really wanted to be a good pastor. I was like wet behind the ears, as they say. I was fresh out of Bible college. I was like, I'm going to freaking pound the devil, kick him in the teeth. I'm going to do everything right. It's going to be awesome. And then I tried. I did all right. Like, I wanted to have the best ideas, the best structure for our ministry, the best events. I wanted to be the best pastor. Without doing a whole lot of seeking God, without doing a whole lot of relying on him. And it wasn't long before the quick success dried up. And I was exhausted. And I was in prayer, and I felt like God said, so how'd you like that? And I was like, oh, it was okay. I'm really tired. And I don't think I can do that forever. And he said, no one asked you to. Are you ready to let me do the heavy lifting? You're spinning your wheels trying to get good ideas, put on good events, be a good pastor. And I'm here with the tools, with the gifts to make that happen. I don't get it right all the time, but I've grown a lot in this area. And I've told you before how I practice this in my life. Every morning while I'm praying, I ask God to help me untie and raise my sails. Something I pray every single day. If my life were a ship, I want God to help me remove the binding from the sails. Any sin, doubt, unforgiveness, the stuff that keeps me out of his presence, the stuff that blocks my ears to his voice. Untie my sails. And I could leave the sails down and then just, they're free, but I'm going to steer wherever I want. But I ask him to raise these sails into the wind of his spirit. I'm not driving. I'm going to hold the helm steady, but your wind is taking me where we're going. That illustration helps me to put in a memorable picture of what I want. With God's instruction, God's control over my life, I want to just completely put it in his hands. That's what I say what I mean when I say I untie and raise my sails every day. He's asked us to trust him, to rely on him. We should remember that we serve a God of comfort. And when you are suffering, the God of comfort wants to be the one to comfort you. Through God, through your faith community, he wants to show you his comfort. We are meant to rely on him in that kind of time. God can handle the ugliness of whatever mess you're in, even the stuff you caused yourself. He can handle it. He wants you to bring it to him. In fact, in many ways, he has handled it on the cross already. You can trust him with it. And the God of peace, the God of comfort, has called his people to be people of peace and comfort. So we should be looking for opportunities within our family, within our church family, in our biological family, in our community, all around, we should be like on the hunt for people to show comfort, to show peace, to be a steady presence to people who are suffering. So that I can say, hey, I have peace because I serve the God of peace. And the God of peace has peace for you. God takes care of people. God's people take care of people who don't have people. From the very beginning, we've been called to look after vulnerable people. It's who God is. It's what he does. It's who God's people are. It's what we do. His timing is perfect. And another thing that is perfectly timed is you. Your life, your job, your family, your house, your community. He has timed you for right now, right here. Doesn't mean that all those things are going to be perfect. It means God's timing is perfect. And he has a purpose and plan for you in the time and place he has you right now. He's put you here for a reason. Asks us to rely on him, to untie and raise our sails, to be completely dependent on him, so that he can lead us into those plans. Why has he put me here? Why has he put me here right now? I don't know, but I figure out what that is by trusting him, untying and raising my sails, giving it entirely to him. He shows us his plan. He shows us his timing. When my boat is being directed by his wind, I'm just looking for the opportunity he has. I can walk confidently. I'm in his presence. I'm in his purpose and plan. His timing is perfect. So I'm just looking for it. He's put you here now for a reason. I believe God has called our family to new life in this place, in this community. It's God's timing. I believe that. I believe that you are here in God's timing, God's perfect timing. He's going to use you, do something impactful for his kingdom in this community right here, right now. We saw in the beginning of Acts, expectation, preparation, God moving the pieces into place. I just believe his timing is perfect, his plan is perfect, so I'm on the lookout for it. I'm seeking him for it. You and I are a part of that perfect plan, that perfect timing, which means I can trust his perfect timing. Let's pray. God, we need you. We trust you. We rely on you. We are utterly dependent on you. I don't want to try and figure it out on my own. I've been there, done that. It's exhausting. It dries up fast. I don't want anything to do with it. Every step I take, every day I'm alive, I depend on you. I put it in your hands. I untie and raise my sails into the wind of your spirit. Help me to follow you every day of my life. Help me to depend on you, to seek out your purpose, your plan, your timing every day of my life. I can even do the good stuff in the wrong order and mess it up, so God, I must rely on you, rely on your spirit.